the lighthouse that still works. My name is Mara Ellison, and I accepted the temporary keeper position at Point Reyes Light because the Coast Guard required a human presence during the winter months to monitor the aging beacon and override any failures in the automated system, while I myself was desperate for a place where no one could find me. The lighthouse has operated on automation since the 1970s, but recurring Pacific storms frequently damage solar panels and backup generators, forcing occasional manual staffing to ensure the light never fails. At 38 years old, I was emerging from a long relationship that had faded into mutual silence and exhaustion, and the promise of months alone with the ocean and the wind felt like the only thing that could quiet the noise in my head. The tower itself stands 85 feet tall, painted white with a red lantern room at the top, perched on a rugged headland 200 feet above the crashing Pacific. Access is limited to a narrow concrete path from a locked gate at the parking lot, and the keeper's cottage attached to the base contains only the essentials: a cast-iron-wood stove for heat, a narrow single bed, a scarred table for meals and logs, a shortwave radio for communication, and large windows that frame nothing but endless gray sea. I arrived in early November with my truck packed full of canned food, coffee, extra blankets, and a few books I intended to read, although I rarely opened them once the routine took hold. The first few weeks passed in a steady rhythm that began to feel like a form of healing. Twice each day I climbed the spiral iron staircase inside the tower, the steps echoing in the narrow space, to inspect the massive Fresnel lens, wipe away salt spray and condensation from the glass panels, and confirm that the rotation mechanism was functioning without fault. The beacon followed its programmed cycle faithfully: white flash, red flash every 5 seconds, sending its warning light 24 miles out to sea on clear nights. I spent the daylight hours logging wind speeds, wave heights, barometric pressure, and any distant vessels I could hear crackling over the radio or spot through binoculars. In between duties, I stood at the cottage windows or on the small exterior platform, watching dense fog banks roll in from the west like slow-moving walls, swallowing the coastline in their opaque embrace. The nights were raw and relentless. Wind howled around the tower's edges, waves pounded the rocks far below, and the beacon's steady sweep across the dark water became the only constant I could trust. For the first time in years, I slept deeply, the ocean sounds lulling me into a rest I had forgotten was possible. The first anomaly occurred in mid-December, when I was jolted awake at 3 in the morning by the foghorns deep. Mournful blasts, 30 seconds apart, automatic when visibility drops below 1 mile. When I went to bed earlier, the sky had been clear, stars sharp overhead, no hint of moisture in the air, so the sudden activation startled me. I pulled on boots, grabbed a flashlight, and climbed the tower stairs in the dark, the beam bouncing off white-painted walls. At the lantern room, the lens rotated smoothly, but outside a thick fog had materialized without warning, muffling the world and reducing the light's reach to almost nothing. The horn continued its calls even as the fog began to thin and stars reappeared overhead. The control panel displayed no errors or warnings. I flipped the manual override, and the horn fell silent. I logged the incident with exact times and details, then returned to the cottage, telling myself it was a sensor glitch or corrosion from constant salt exposure. The following night, the pattern repeated itself. Fog rolled in around midnight, dense enough to swallow the beam completely. The horn activated immediately, shaking the cottage with each blast. I climbed the stairs again, flashlight in hand, and waited in the lantern room as the fog slowly lifted, revealing stars and calm black water. The horn refused to stop despite the clear improvement in visibility. I stood at the rail, hands gripping cold metal, listening to the echo bounce off distant cliffs. The panel still showed normal readings. I performed a full power cycle and reset, and the horn finally went quiet. I convinced myself it was old equipment acting up, nothing that couldn't wait for spring maintenance. By the third night, I was anticipating it. Midnight brought fog on schedule. The horn started. I delayed my climb this time, sitting in the cottage counting blasts. When I finally reached the lantern room, the fog was already thinning. I stepped to the windows and looked out. The beam swept across the water and briefly illuminated a distant shape, a low, dark silhouette rocking in the swell, like a small boat or mast. No running lights. It vanished when I blinked. I scanned again with binoculars, but saw only empty waves. The horn continued blasting. I shut it off manually and remained in the lantern room until dawn, unsettled by what I had glimpsed. I began documenting every detail in my journal, exact times of fog arrival and departure, duration of the horn's overextension, and descriptions of the fleeting silhouette. During daylight radio check-ins, I reported the horn issue to the district office and requested a technical review. They ran remote diagnostics and found no faults in the system logs or sensor data. The technician dismissed it as typical quirks with aging coastal equipment exposed to salt and wind, advising me to keep monitoring but not to worry unless the light itself failed. One chose not to mention the silhouette. It would have sounded like the product of fatigue or imagination, and I had no desire to invite scrutiny or replacement. The incident soon settled into an unbreakable pattern. Every night around midnight, the fog appeared without meteorological warning, thick and sudden. The horn activated as designed. The beacon continued turning without issue, but the horn would persist for 12 minutes beyond the moment the fog cleared, forcing me to climb the tower each time to reset it manually. Strangely, the fog always began thinning the instant I entered the lantern room, as if my arrival triggered its retreat. I timed everything obsessively. Average fog duration 47 minutes, horn overrun exactly 12 minutes past clear conditions. The clockwork precision disturbed me more than the fog or the sound itself. It felt less like malfunction and more like something waiting for my response. One night, I experimented by allowing the horn to run longer than usual. I remained in the cottage, sipping cold coffee and counting the blasts. After 15 minutes, I climbed the stairs. The lantern room felt colder than normal when I entered. I stood at the rail and watched the beam sweep across the water. I caught the silhouette again, closer this time. A small boat with a low, dark hull, no lights, rocking but not advancing. The fog parted around it like curtains drawn aside. Then the horn stopped without any intervention from me, and in the same instant the boat dissolved into the darkness. I stayed in the lantern room until first light, heart beating too hard. After that, I moved my nights to the lantern room itself. I hauled up a thermos of coffee, a thick blanket, and sat on the iron steps watching the beam circle endlessly. The fog arrived as expected. The horn began its calls. I waited. 12 minutes after the fog lifted, footsteps sounded on the spiral stairs below, slow. Deliberate, the unmistakable sound of heavy boots on metal rungs. The station was locked down, the gate chained, no one else within miles. The steps continued upward, echoing in the tight tower, and stopped at the landing just outside the lantern room door. I called out into the darkness, my voice sounding small and thin. "Who's there?" No reply. I waited 10 minutes, gripping the flashlight. Nothing. I eased the door open a crack. The landing was empty, the air still and cold. No wet footprints, no breath fogging in the beam. The fog outside had cleared completely. The horn had fallen silent on its own. I closed the door and sat back down, shaking. The footsteps returned the next night at the same time. Same slow ascent, same pause at the landing, same reluctant descent. I kept the door closed and stayed in place until dawn. When I descended to the cottage, my hands trembled as I poured coffee. I searched through old keeper logs stored in the cottage cabinet. Most entries were routine: weather notes, maintenance records, passing ships. But a 1994 entry from Thomas Reed stood out. Foghorn activates without fog. Footsteps heard ascending stairs after midnight. No visible source. Activity ceased completely after I left lantern room door propped open one night. Reed requested transfer the following season. No further explanation. That evening, I propped the lantern room door open with a small block of wood. Fog arrived. Horns started. Footsteps began their climb, steady, unhurried. They reached the landing and paused longer than before. Cold air drifted through the open doorway. The beam swept past. No shadow crossed the threshold. The footsteps retreated downward. The horn stopped without intervention. The footsteps became a nightly event. Always the ascent during the horn, the extended pause at the open door, the slow descent. They never entered the lantern room. The silhouette on the water appeared more frequently, closer each time, always caught in the beam's path, always vanishing when the horn fell silent. I spent those hours sitting on the steps, door open, blanket around me, waiting. January fogs grew denser, winds stronger. The footsteps lingered longer at the landing, 5 minutes stretching to 10. One night a faint knock sounded on the doorframe, soft, almost tentative. I remained seated. The knock repeated. Silence followed. The descent began immediately. I started speaking quietly into the dark during the pauses. What are you waiting for? Why the horn? Why not come inside? No response came, but the pauses continued to lengthen. The silhouette drew nearer. One night, it was close enough to see details. A battered fishing boat, hull dark and rusted, no sail or engine, rocking in place within the light. A Coast Guard maintenance crew arrived in February. 2 technicians tested the horn, lens, wiring, sensors, found nothing abnormal. They asked if I was coping with the isolation. Said yes. They left after an hour. The footsteps returned that night, louder, more insistent on the iron stairs. Late February brought a severe storm. Waves surged over lower rocks, wind screamed through the tower. The beacon flickered but held rotation. The horn blasted through the gale. Footsteps climbed amid the chaos, slow, unaffected. They reached the door and knocked 3 times, clear above the wind. I stood and opened the door wide. Cold air rushed in, stinging. The landing was empty. The horn stopped. The fog parted briefly. The boat was below the cliff, hull scraping rocks with each wave. Then it vanished as the storm closed in again. After the storm passed, everything ceased. No more footsteps on the stairs, no horn activating in fog. The beacon continued its rotation. The silhouette never reappeared. I waited each night with the door open, listening for any sign. The tower stayed silent. March arrived with longer days and lighter fog, packed my belongings gradually, completed final logs, secured the cottage. On my last evening, I climbed the tower at dusk. The beacon flashed white, red. I spoke aloud into the empty lantern room. "You don't need me here anymore," the wind answered softly. Nothing else came. I drove down the coast road as the sun set. The lighthouse receded in the rearview mirror, its beam sweeping the darkening water. That night, no fog rolled in, no horn sounded, no footsteps echoed. I live inland now in a quiet town with streetlights and occasional traffic. Some nights I wake at 3 a.m., ears straining for a distant horn or boots on iron. Nothing comes. Whatever was present at Point Reyes completed its vigil with me. Climbed the stairs, knocked, waited through the pauses. When I opened the door and spoke, it departed without crossing the threshold. I have not returned to the lighthouse. Subsequent keeper logs show no reports of anomalous horns or footsteps. The Coast Guard has not contacted me. The station operates on full automation again, standing alone on the headland. If something remains out there on the water, lost in fog, rocking in swells, it knows where the light is. It no longer needs me to open the door or guide it. The tower is silent unless the weather requires otherwise. I am silent too. Sleep comes more easily now. When I wake in the small hours, it is 2 ordinary sounds. Cars passing, wind in branches, a neighbor's door closing. No boots on iron stairs, no blasts through mist. The lighthouse stands at peace on the cliff. So do I.